All right, and if if StreamYard here is responding immediately, well then we should be live right now. So hello everybody, it is Dark Conservatarian, and I'm here interviewing somebody who I've never talked to before, and that would be JWille. Introduce yourself, JWille.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is just a. I tend to talk about like political stuff and also like video game footage, but not really gaming channel at all. I wouldn't say that, more of a political channel, but I basically do like talk about whatever I basically feel like important right now. I'm very slow at uploading, so it's not really full of. It's quite empty channel. It's not really that much things that's on it, but it's getting there. So that's basically it. Should I also explain my life beliefs or something?
We can go explain what your political ideology is that you would say.
Oh yeah, my political ideology would be federalism, because well, it's kind of hard to explain why, but I just find it to be the most logical, conclusive idea. Is because because I doesn't like imperialism, because that usually ends up with one small group of people in one specific area impose their will on a large amount of area, even though the people living there does not agree with that. They can either do it by colonization or democracy, or by just outnumbering the smaller regions. So I would also say that the United States is a very good example, because you don't have power concentrated in one area. It's basically the states who decides over the government, and then the government decides over the rest, if that makes sense. Is that true about America?
That's supposed to be that's how it's supposed to be anyways, but slowly more and more each day it's becoming less of the case of where that the federal government is actually overruling the state governments in their own sovereignty and their own, state governance and so forth. So yeah, JWille here is somebody who I hardly know, you, JWille. The only bit that I have I think the first time that I've ever come across you was that one live stream that you and JWille and the rest were on S-Man stream and witnessing the meltdown of Cult of Ham, if you recall that moment.
Oh god, that was hilarious.
And then you go asking, he's older than I am? So
I don't remember.
Yeah, I do not know of how we got to be first introduced to you, even by name. Is it through JWille that we got to first know you or something?
Possible, but then other people, and then it was this Twitter group where a lot of people were in with the wait, what's the name of the guy? I don't know what his name is, but he was called.
Are you trying to think Modwayne Alarin, maybe?
No, it was the other British guy. You remember?
Oh no! Don't make me utter his name.
He was in the chat.
Oh, Common Sense guy. Okay. There was another British dude that I was thinking of there that I did not want to mention by name. Common Sense guy. Okay. Yeah, I know Common Sense guy. He's a pretty chill dude himself. So I'm trying to line up all the questions. You say that you're for federalism as far as system of governments go. I want to asking further. What's your thoughts on libertarianism? Because for some reason on the outset of things, I just go when I go vaguely knowing as much as I vaguely know about your politics, anyways. The way that I can assess is that you're somewhat of a libertarian, more precisely a minarchist. Not an ANCAP, I don't think, but would you like consider yourself to be a minarchist libertarian at all, or what?
Well, I wouldn't really call that myself, but if other people call me that, then I would sort of accept it, because it's also quite accurate. Because if we say that having government control of things is generally something that should be avoided if necessary. But if there is a system that they have one government policy that runs fine and dandy, then to like advocate for its dissolution. But generally, it's the cases that never tend to occur. So in most cases, I tend to just end up on the minarchist position anyway, because of the ineptitude of most government policies.
Yeah, like I got on watching that debate that you and the rest were having with Cold of Ham, and it seemed that you were like, from the way that you were arguing and the beliefs that you're espousing, it seemed that you were leaning more towards the right when it comes to like economic policy and so forth. Like,
Well,
actually, I got. Go on.
No, I'm very unsure about that, because the last time I did a political compass test, it replaced on the libertarian end and dead center.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was like, oh, what does this mean? But you are right, because if you look at federalism as a political ideology, it do to lean towards the right, because if you have a unitary state, that will redistribute the wealth between two certain states or provinces within that country. Federalism, then the wealth will stay within the provinces who have earned their wealth, whereas which technically would lead to rather than parity, which is what federalism ultimately creates, and that's more justifiable than to like take from one place to the other, because that's like robbing them just because they happen to be in the same country, which was something that was decided several generations ago, and that's not exactly fair for prosperous regions and the people who live there, because especially if you look at multicultural countries, where certain states have a different culture and different demographics than the other, which results in them being more prosperous than other provinces or states. And then if you have a federalism, then the people who do the best, otherwise people who do the best will have their success transferred or distributed to the other. That's fair. Like they will have more, but you're taking from somebody who earned it, and that's not. I don't really find it to be right. Like of countries there are very few resources for certain things. And in some other policies, hard to name by name, it can still be in the hands of the federal government and the unitary states, but that's something that preferably should be out, because not avoiding it will result in injustice, and federalism is a more just and than imperialist societies, which I have to be frank and call them, because if you advocate for a unitary state, even if it is democracy or a colonial empire or a dictatorship, it's just going to be imperialist, which are going to be exploited by others.
Yeah, I say that I would like favor more of a federal republic than a straight democracy myself when it comes to JWille roboting like a mofo, says Red Feather. I don't know. I guess maybe it's because of not having the smoothest connection. And hello, Red Feather, by the way. But yeah, when it comes to like systems of government, I am somewhat leaning towards the idea that a straight majoritarian democracy, that is more of the left persuasion of things, and a republic that has more checks and balances in the government, like multiple houses of Congress. Like here in the United States, we have the House of Representatives and the Senate, and even the Electoral College. That's more of a Republican type thing than a Democratic type thing when it comes to system of government. I'm not talking about parties here, by the way, y'all, but I think you get my point there, JWille.
It does
So
make sense.
I do want to like ask one curious question towards you though, and actually, I guess this is one other thing. The only reason that maybe I perceived you to be a little bit more right leaning is because Koldepan being like the more further left one in that debate that we mentioned earlier. But that aside, in further exploration of your economic beliefs, how do you feel about single payer healthcare? In favor of it, against it, or what?
I basically would say it's simple in one way, because if you say, how can you have a government with the size of the United States, with the immigration policy of the United States, and convert it to a single payer? Sorry, but that's not exactly going to work. The reason why many European countries could have that was because they have a very, very high employment rate, and people as well as rich people. So something people might forget, but that's actually how it's run. And they did it because they have very low immigration, and there were very few people who were on welfare. So if you're going to have a single payer, or at least healthcare for all citizens, then you need to have a very low unemployment rate, and you need to have low rates of immigration, and you must have a low welfare state, or else that's actually not going to. You cannot be able to give everybody healthcare and have what you have in the United States. That's a contradiction of terms, like not of terms, but of economy.
Yeah.
Because
yeah, it's not necessarily a contradiction. You kind of almost said that it was like a contradiction, but then you said actually no. But I will say it's not necessarily a contradiction for you to believe in, say, open borders, for example, and single payer at the same time. It's just somewhat disadvantageous, is what I think is what you're getting at, kind of self-defeating. That if you have like this high influx of people coming into your country, and they're not willing to like really contribute that much, then they're just going to be sapping off the welfare state, is what you're getting at. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, as well as setting up the healthcare bill, because if you look at European countries like France, which have for EU citizens have very good access to healthcare in France, for instance, it's a really good system. That all the healthcare is very localized. But if you compare it to a country like Sweden, because of the high rates of immigration, it have resulted into a bankruptcy of the their healthcare system, as well as unnecessary bureaucracy, which costs them a lot of money. And if you compare the country of Sweden to France, and I've been in hospitals in both countries, by the way, France is much, much, much better. And I believe that if having a system like that France have is something that quick, but you can't have if the United States cannot really imply that, because the United States economy and size of the country and the immigration rates cannot convert into a system like France. And France doesn't have a socialist system, not even close to it. It's basically the reason why they can even have like healthcare for all EU citizens is because they have such a high standard of living in the country, average, by the way, and because they had so few on welfare and so few low-skilled immigration. And I would say if an American state wanted to try out that system, like I would say that it's good that they can have that opportunity, but I don't think. But to let the federal government do it in a big country like that, it's going to lead to more bureaucracy, which is going to stack up the system, which is not going to let it work. And only if the state themselves could afford it. And if you want to have and even close to a system like that, you need to build the wall. That's just this. Sorry.
Right. And something that you go mentioning as to how immigration and welfare state or single payer or a healthcare system, more precisely, how those coincide with one another. Milton Friedman actually said some comments on immigration that it seemed like he would prefer if we had like a lax immigration system or even like open borders, but only if we had like pretty much abolished the welfare state is what his belief is on that. I think that's what he would prefer, but the only way that he would like be for immigration control is if we do have a huge welfare state, which we kind of do currently here in the United States. So I guess by extension, how would you ideally prefer it, JWille? Would you prefer if we had like open borders and there was no single payer, or would you prefer that there is a single payer healthcare system and all the other kinds of welfare, but there's like a slow and controlled immigration system?
I would prefer this. I would prefer if we have a capitalistic immigration policy with the right to return. If you want me to elaborate on that.
A capitalist immigration system. What do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Oh, it's if somebody could find work, or could find if somebody could visit the country legally, find work, and find somewhere to live, then they have proven themselves to be an effective citizen, and that would actually lower immigration to EU countries. That would lower immigration by a shocking amount, because that means that people who move there without being able to speak the language or without being able to get work would not be able to stay, because they cannot support themselves. They would have to be deported. And they would also need to enter legally, and they need to have the financial means to drive or fly to a certain, also apply for visitation. And also I believe that that's something that you can decide between countries. Like if you're an EU citizen, it's probably very easy for you to visit United States without getting your visa checked, if I'm all right, if I know that. Or how does it work over there?
I don't know exactly how the there are work visas that we offer out to immigrants. So, well, they're not technically immigrants if they're on a work visa, but yeah, we have a work visa program. And if they go like violating the law in some horrendous way, that's when their visa actually. That's when they get deported, or if they have like an expired work visa, well then technically they aren't supposed to be staying in the country, and that's when they are like open for deportation, as if they're on an expired work visa.
Yeah, that's actually quite good, because you can technically have that anybody can come as long as they can get employment and get somewhere to live. So and that's basically, and if you had that, then immigration to your country would drop astronomically, because of the incentivized to get used to get a better life, and to get something that if somebody lives in, for example, a criminal infested Central American country, and they know that they can get welfare in the United States, and that's a plus, and that's going to lead to more immigration. But if you can't do that, and if you need to, all I can do if you can get to work and speak the language, then your illegal immigration would like not be a problem anymore. So capitalist immigration is going to have the effect of very strict border controls, because people who can't support themselves, who would become a drained system, would not be able to immigrate.
Yeah,
But there is one. Oh, you can go.
Oh, I was about to say illegal immigration would be less of an issue if there was if there wasn't a minimum wage law, for example, and there wasn't as much welfare being given out to people.
Yeah, like, do you give illegal immigrants welfare?
Technically, we're not supposed to, but there was like this one source that was given to me by a fan of the channel or a subscriber of the channel, Metal Minister, where it was like it was showing basically of what type of welfare that people would be getting. Let me see if I can like scroll down to where he's at. But yeah, and there's also like tax refunds that people get, and I have been told that supposedly that a tax refund that isn't technically welfare. But I will say that if like a given person, or let's say a given group of people, that being illegal immigrants in this case, if they're like receiving more than they are paying into this system, well then in a way that is welfare, because they're not just getting their own money back through tax returns, they're also getting other people's money because they got the benefit of having uh, so many children to where they get child tax credits and so forth. But yeah, I'll have to like source you the video of where I go reading about that, where they like use false social security numbers, or they use this special immigration number called a DCIN. I do not know what the initials for that stands for exactly, but that's what I roughly remember. Yeah, let me you go on. I'm gonna ask somebody something on Twitter.
Oh yeah, is this? I could say that. Wait, I need to think for a second. Is that one thing I believe that is important also when you regarding immigration is that you need to be sure that the people aren't going to reduce your people. It's not going to have a demographic effect on your country, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if we, for example, have an immigration of only men, I think that is not really good for society, because chances of getting reproductive opportunities and marriage is going to drop if you have a high male population and female. But if you have a high female population, then the number of then the equality would increase, because then women would be less would not be able to have the same standards as they could have otherwise if they became the majority, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, sorry, I've been trying to like look through older DMs. Sorry, how rude of me. But so I guess we'll like kind of segue on into talking about countries in general. Regarding France, though, do they not have like an open borders policy currently, or what country do you live in right now, if I may ask?
Oh no, I prefer not exactly saying the specific country I usually live in right now, but I'm basically saying that the countries that I have most experience with will be France and
Oh,
South Africa.
oh, sorry. My bad. But
No,
France,
it's okay.
but France, by your knowledge, don't they have like an open border immigration policy? I guess I don't know for certain, but what would you say about that?
I would say they have to a certain extent, like because EU people from the EU can immigrate to France because it's the EU, but people still
Right.
like prefer to stay in their home countries, because like why wouldn't you live with people who speak your own language rather than go to France to learn French? But the problem is that there have been a lot of um, um, illegal immigrants posing as refugees. And I know France haven't suffered in the same amount as Germany and Sweden, but it's not really good to France. It's not good for cultural things, and it's not good for it's not good for the economy, and it isn't frankly good for the citizens either. It's basically a disaster to a certain, not a disaster, but it is having a really negative impact, because it could have a negative effect on the healthcare system, because having a healthcare system like France works, but it's delicate. And also I heard something horrible, terrible thing that happened in France because the migration if you want to hear it.
Actually, yeah, you can tell me that in a bit. But I was wanting to ask you. I meant to ask you a little bit earlier. But France's immigration system, or excuse me, no, healthcare system. I mean, do they have like a fully nationalized healthcare system, kind of like the NHS in the UK, or do you guys have or do they have a private option? My bad.
Oh God, I think that oh God, this is actually kind of hard. Is because I think that
You don't know for certain then?
No, I'm not entirely sure. I know that we have insurance,
Okay.
which is basically something that works. I think it works in conjunction with the with the healthcare system, which is going to make sure they don't run out of cash. If that makes sense.
What the heck?
So that's basically no. It is a national. People have a national health insurance called NHI, and it's often so yeah. That's basically. So all the citizens have all the citizens have a.
All citizens have a public or private health insurance.
Yeah, they have public and private insurance. So basically,
okay,
it's a system where it's the state and the private enterprise working together, and it works.
So that
fine and dandy.
Okay, so there is a private side to the healthcare system. I mean, I have kind of a hard time, kind of have a problem with the definition of single payer healthcare, because I say that if there is a private option towards a healthcare, that kind of immediately disqualifies it as technically being a single payer healthcare system. But that's just me though. So what was it that you wanted to say a little bit earlier though, before I got asking you further about France's healthcare?
Okay, I would just finish my point about the healthcare, then I go mission cost front. It's just the thing is on healthcare, and it's because it's corporations, it's insurance companies, it's the public healthcare system, and it works perfect, and it works very good because there are a combination, people cooperate, and you can buy private insurance, and that's going to cooperate with the public, so technically helping because of private insurance and private healthcare stuff, that is actually going to lead to more funding in the public system, which leads for it to trickle down to the average citizens who doesn't really afford it. So it's like private healthcare improves the healthcare for the country, which is not the same as single payer healthcare. It's not that everything is being nationalized and that's free for everybody. No, it's not that. It is free for everybody, but because some people have private, and that is helping it go to extend their healthcare access to the people who doesn't. If that makes sense.
Yeah. They extend their. Sorry, what?
Do you have any questions about that?
No, not really. It's just I'm noticing somebody being kind of trolly in the chat just a little bit. So I guess we'll move on to talking more about South Africa now. South Africa, do they have open borders immigration policy themselves?
Yeah, we can, but I just need to. I'm sorry, but I just need to finish the thing I was explaining about France.
Go on.
It's the thing is that they have. They basically had a Gothic cathedral that was 600 years old, and they basically tore it down, and then trying to replace it with a mosque. So that's something that I find to be horrendous. So I basically doesn't want.
Is the mosque being privately or
pretty much done?
Is the mosque being privately or publicly funded, the construction of it?
I'm actually not entirely sure about that. I don't know, but they basically wanted to replace an old church with a mosque, and that's just something that I find to be horrible, because the church wasn't really a simple thing. It was like a 600-year-old Gothic cultural heritage site, but but the government doesn't care about that.
You're not talking about Notre Dame, are you?
No, another one. But don't work. And now they broke another one on purpose because they basically the thing about the EU. They basically try to erase the Christianity from the content from the EU because I don't know. It's an opposition to him. It's like leads to I don't know why they're doing it, but I'm speculating it's something to do with migration. If you have two competing religions, then it could create things, stir up things, and if they get rid of one of them, this would be easier for the other one to like dominate us. When I'm by speculating, because like if you look at the EU, they basically they basically make the impression that they don't want Christianity to be like around anymore. It's basically kind of weird, but it's just basically how I feel about it.
So wait, let me get this straight. Like they were like demolishing a church that was already constructed and replacing it with a mosque?
Yeah, and it was constructed 600 years ago.
Okay.
And it was really, really good shape and worked perfectly. No, it was not a church, it was a cathedral even. So
I will say that if this is like being government funded and whatnot, that this is
yeah, it was government funded. No, government funded demolishing, and
but the construction of the mosque itself.
I don't know about that, but I basically doesn't want to replace a cathedral with a mosque in France. Because if you look at the belief system about Christianity and Islam, is that property rights is covered in Islam. Basically, it says that if you have a mosque on somewhere, then that land is owned by God, and that supersedes, and that's something important or whatever. I'm not entirely sure, but in certain interpretations say that supersedes all man-made law. And some people say you should obey the law of the land you're on. So it basically depends on the Muslim interpretation you say. But a cathedral doesn't have that.
So
when it comes to...
So basically, according to Sharia law, if some Islamists are like worshiping inside a mosque and whatnot, they can like get away with rape practically, and the government has no jurisdiction over that.
No, it's not that. It's just that if you have a mosque in a country, cannot really be used for something else in the future. It's basically stuck. It's a mosque because it's now on land it's owned by God.
Okay, so according to Sharia law, once the mosque is constructed, it cannot ever be demolished.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, I did not know it. Go on.
But luckily, a lot of Muslim people don't really follow that because they say that if you are if a country doesn't have Sharia law or doesn't recognize Sharia law, then it can be, because then it's not technically, because then it's the country aren't abide by Sharia, so therefore it doesn't count. But some people might say that no, a mosque can never not be a mosque, if that makes sense. It depends on the interpretation.
Okay. Yeah, I do think that Islam kind of needs a big time reform itself, kind of like how Christianity had its reform in the 1500s with Martin Luther, to where that the Pope like pretty much did not have as much of a stranglehold as before over the European kingdoms, you know, and Islam needs that pretty badly itself to like pretty much eradicate Sharia law out. I mean, if that's even possible. I do not know the full nitty-gritty interpretations and verses of the Quran and whatnot, if it would technically be Islam without Sharia law, but just Sharia law itself is a disgusting ideology in and of itself that needs to be wiped out, in my opinion. What are you about to say?
Like, people usually say, if you look at one example, is that there are certain things that you can technically follow in your personal life because it covers things that, like, a lot of people say that it's a law that a God have with the individual. So basically, they don't think that it needs to go through a form of government, because according to some interpretation, by necessity man-made, so which means that they cannot be the arbiter of religious law. Religious law must be privately upholded. So if you say that interpretation, Islam can work pretty fine and dandy. And And the thing about the Reformation is that you cannot technically translate or reform the Islam, because that's also forbidden. It's forbidden by the same belief system. You cannot reform the religion, but you can technically take it out of you can't technically place it outside of government, and that's something that works pretty fine if you look at places like Tunisia and Bosnia. And if people say that you cannot allow to translate the Quran, but that's still been happening, because if you look at the North Africa, they have translated the Quran from Arabic to Tamil, which is the indigenous Berber language, even though that's considered to be heresy. Those people, even though they're also Muslims, they basically do it anyway. And even though Reformation isn't technically in South Africa, the Muslim people are more or less Westerners, because they were transported there from Southeast Asia or South Asia by the Dutch East India Company. So they have lived in a Christian majority country for since the 1600s. So basically, they are Westerners. So it can technically happen, even though it can't happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems kind of unlikely to happen, but it could happen. Seems to be what you're saying. And by the way, I will say to Angel in the chat that I do not know what your point is, but I'm not going to be reading most of the chat messages. I mean, especially all these rather trolly messages about France. Just FYI, dude. So anyway, what was I gonna ask?
I have something I can say, is that I said that the Muslim people in South Africa are pretty much.
Oh yeah, we can segue.
Western.
We can segue in talking about South Africa. Go on.
And basically in South Africa, there's something that's going to be complete opposite to Europe, is that in South Africa, the Muslim people are like in Cape Town. Whenever there were Muslims around, you felt more safe, because they are the law-abiding citizens compared to the average population. It's high crime, but if you look at the minorities, especially people who are called white and minorities as well, like those are very underrepresented when it comes to crime. And basically all Muslim people are minorities. They're not black, they are minorities. Basically, they are underrepresented in crime. And that's probably not very important, so we can segue into more important things about South Africa, if you have questions about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of one of the main things that sparked the idea of this conversation, everybody, was that over Discord we were kind of arguing with somebody over gun rights and how authoritarian certain countries can be. So therefore, an armed populace sounds like a good idea. And then JWille was basically bringing up the idea or the example of France and South Africa and some other countries being a fairly authoritarian in of themselves. So something that I kind of want to ask that is kind of an interesting topic. Like, I don't know if you have ever heard of the YouTuber named Starbird Disagrees.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it. I've watched him several times. He's pretty much on spot on most things.
Yeah, Starbird Disagrees. He's the guy that I hear mostly about this whole situation about I don't know, white farmers basically having their own farmland property being taken from them and just sold off to basically some black socialist party or something like that. And I was just wanting to know of what your take is on this whole thing.
It can be worse than what I'm about to explain, or it could be less horrible than what I'm about. I'm 100% sure. I bet is that the government basically said that that because they have communist government and opposition, they are losing votes too, and So basically, the socialist government, the ANC, basically said that they want to redistribute land without compensation. So they basically want to change the constitution of the country, so that they doesn't have to compensate the citizens of their
I kind of
property
want to
they're
say
taking from them, which is
I
unconstitutional human rights violation.
mhm.
But I can't
I do
elaborate
want
on
to
that.
say I do want to say that even with compensation, even if the government is forcefully taking people's land with compensation, it still seems very authoritarian to me, even though it might technically, I guess,
yeah.
not violate the Constitution of South Africa, because I don't know what the Constitution of South Africa is. It sounds like kind of like eminent domain, and I am fairly against eminent domain, if, just to throw my own beliefs out there in the water. But what was you going to say in further?
Oh, I was going to say that then they said the justification for having to change the constitution to redistribute land without compensation, it was that they would take, because a lot of people have left the country and they leave their property, right? And they basically become crime-infested areas because abandoned properties, and then the government cannot do anything about it according to themselves, because then they would, because they have no one to compensate. They need to change the constitution so that they can compensate without compensation, so that they can take the crime-infested properties that nobody they know owns that are in the country. So, and some people believe that the reason they say this, the reason why want to, and sorry, and they also do, the people say that they're doing it just because they don't want to lose the vote to the EFF, which is a radical communist party. So basically, they're basically playing games, because the ANC, they basically tend to promise things and then never deliver. But they basically always blame minorities for not being able to deliver. So people vote for them anyway, because the average IQ of the country is 77. So it's basically kind of a not really the best system you can have. But they first said that they were going to redistribute all land from all citizens, but then the Zulu king, which is a king of a lot of private property, like there is a king who owns private property that people live on, like a traditional kingdom, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they tried to make the land private ownership of the Sulu king, or put it under private ownership of the Sulu king.
No, he already owns a lot of land personally, and they said that they were going to redistribute the land without compensation, all land. And the Zulu king said, "No, if you distribute our land, then we're going to go to war with you." And they said, like, "Oh, then we're only going to redistribute white-owned land without compensation." But that would be another something that's also violates the constitution, technically discriminate against people based on race, even though they're already doing it. So that's basically what results in that. So
apparently,
more or less that. And there is also
apparently
another issue which goes back.
No, go on.
Is that just because there were Muslim people living in the country, you cannot really redistribute like they're going to, if they would redistribute their holy places, then that would also religion to a certain extent. It would be wrong. According to their beliefs. So basically, the Zulu, and basically they want to redistribute farmland, like they say they want to take white farmers' land, which would result to a food shortage, and that would be disastrous. So there are lots of voices in the country from several different ethnic and religious communities that are not aboard with the whole redistributing without compensation. Well, also because it's a horrible idea. Like, it's basically resulting in property values going down, and there are a lot of farmers being murdered in the country, which is pretty horrendous. And a lot of people certain people that they basically say have said shoot the farmer a lot of the time, certain radicals, and then there's been people who've done it, and those people are official, like people with a lot of influence, and nothing is being done about it. And yeah, so if you have any questions to go on by that.
I think there was one, but it kind of slipped my mind. I do want to say that maybe I should like get back into that maybe I should get back into streaming more often, because apparently my attention span is not like it once was when I used to do these live streams quite more often. Yeah, taking kind of a bit of a slowdown on the channel. So, oh yeah, the motivation for doing this redistribution of land. What is the exact story behind that? I mean, they're saying that basically, is it basically supposed to be kind of a way of reparations for Black people?
Well, yeah, basically, they basically say that land theft of their land have been unjustifiable. He basically, the president said it was like that country's original sin. Even though the number of Black people owning land now is higher than it's ever been in history. So
it's kind of hard to redistribute it to every one of them. Like you're gonna have like multiple owners over a single different land, like a single piece of land, anyways. Multiple different families. Like what's the reparations for what exactly? For slavery, for former slaves of South Africa, or something?
Oh, no Black person has been enslaved in South Africa. Like the only Black people who were slaves in South Africa, they basically got absorbed by the colored and the Afrikaner and the Cape Malays, who are not Black. None of them are.
So
and the only people who are still Black, who were slaves at one point, were slaved by other Black people.
okay.
Slavery that you have in the United States never existed in South Africa, at least when it comes to Black people. It's with other peoples that weren't Black, mostly from Asia, and the people who were Black, they basically have their descendants are now mixed and not really Black anymore. They're not really counted as Black legally.
Okay.
So
that's interesting. South Africa wasn't part of the transatlantic slave trade in the same way that the U.S. and good portion of Europe was.
No, not exactly. It was basically it was part of the slave trade, as it had some slaves from that they brought over from Angola during the VOC's time, and they have slaves from Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Malaysia, and India, but there were never any other Black slaves besides those from Angola, and their descendants are now either white or colored, at least of the Black slaves, and they're kind of abolished either before or during the time of the British Empire. And when they abolished slavery, there were no Black person in when slavery was abolished.
By the way, I do want to say for everybody who is like watching this in the future, I do want to say for everybody that is watching this in the future and looking at the live chat and thinking Red Feather is just talking to herself or something. She actually isn't. She's talking to a guy named Angel who keeps on retracting his own messages. Just FYI. Not that, by the way, Angel, I don't have a big issue with you retracting each one of your messages. It's just kind of weird. That's all I have to say. I'm not a huge fan of Trump, but I think he is good for the country in these crazy times, says Red Feather. Okay. So in what other ways would you call South Africa authoritarian other than like seizing people's land without compensation?
I think Trump. No.
Okay. Well, I wasn't asking about Trump. Like I was asking about South Africa, though.
Okay.
Like
sure. talked about one, but I just had to clarify what I actually meant about him.
Okay. So again with my question though, like in what other ways would you call South Africa being authoritarian other than seizing people's lands without compensation?
Don't think that they have been able to do it yet. They have been trying to. They try to redistribute land, and then the landowner got a restraining order to the government. The government cannot go and try to take its land again. I think they managed to expropriate some land, but they have to pay compensation because they have not been able to change the constitution to take yet. But they say that they want to. So I hope that's like covering it. And the thing is that being authoritarian is that they have very strict gun rights. So even some people that have no background checks and they have no and have no criminal record. They have no criminal record at all, but it's still hard to get a gun because they said it doesn't qualify for gun ownership. And they say that even having self-defense doesn't always qualify for gun ownership. They try to change that so that self-defense is not reason enough to be able to buy a gun. And something else
bullshit.
But yeah, it is bullshit. It's complete and utter bullshit. It's complete horseshit. It's like one of the worst, especially they have so much murder.
I mean, for one thing, I will say, what business is it of the government to be asking anyways, why is it that you want to buy a gun? First of all, but it's even further bullshit if you're saying that self-defense, which I find to be the number one most valid reason to own yourself a firearm, that they would say that that's not good enough reasoning for us to allow you to buy a gun. Yeah.
I think that they're feeling threatened because they have so much bad policies. So they don't really think people. I just don't think that they don't. I think that they just don't want people to be able to defend themselves. Basically, how can you take people's land without compensation, without forcing them? So, yeah, that's it. And if you look, good thing is that the private sector in South Africa, the private security companies, have more manpower combined. So it's not so authoritarian in that regard. So people say, well, turns out it does work. Sorry to break it to all the people on the left and the authoritarian side, but private police kind of works, at least better than the official police, at least in South Africa. Do you want to hear other examples of them being authoritarian?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like that you were just expounding on the point of when it comes to land redistribution, and I guess that would kind of be reason enough for people to, like, you know, be able to own guns. I mean, that's basically what the whole Cliven Bundy story was here in the United States. I do not know if you had ever heard of that story, but there was a Nevada cattle rancher named Cliven Bundy. His land was trying, the Nevada government, I mean, was trying to like seize his land, and then there was like a big standoff that he had with the local police in them trying to like arrest him and the rest of his family, or trying to seize the land just in general, anyways. But no, they were resisting that, and they had like AR-15 shotguns, and he was just and he had some of his buddies helping him too in this standoff. And ultimately, it came to the point that I think the guns were just like laying down, and they took the whole case to court instead. I think ultimately Cliven Bundy has won the court case, but that would be like an example here in the United States of the legitimacy as to why there is legitimate reason as to why an armed populace would seem reasonable. And by extension, this seems to be kind of the same story here in South Africa, or wherever there in South Africa, just in general. You know, people trying having their land taken by the government, but then they resist that. But I guess I would like ask, outside of guns, is there any ways of being able to resist this, like take it to court or whatnot?
Yeah, they had done it, and they actually got a restraining order against the government because they cannot, because the government can still be like prosecuted like any other entity. So that works for now, but if they can change the constitution, that might not work in the future.
Mhm.
And it's kind of hard to, because a lot of people already have, like, if I get one population for physical removal from a certain area, like that's the guilty of a crime called an international crime to do so. It's like you can't do that, like under international law, because if you do that, then you are, I think that would be called genocide, if that makes sense.
It'd be called what?
Ethnic cleansing.
Oh, ethnic cleansing. I do not know much about ethnic cleansing. I mean, I will say that as messed up as as messed up as the whole thing in South Africa going on is right now, I guess I don't see it as a way of like full on white genocide or something like that.
No, it's not that. You said that if you were to take the, if you were to take the land of one specific minority
Mm-hmm.
and not the others, then you will remove a certain ethnicity from a certain area,
Okay.
and that would be almost by definition ethnic cleansing, if that makes sense.
Uh, Perhaps a very mild form. And by the way, sorry, I did not
Yeah.
mean to like make the implication that you're an alt-right or anything. So
No,
just to
I'm not. I
clarify
don't
that
believe
point,
in it.
I was not calling JWille an alt-right, or he has never claimed to be everybody. So just FYI on that part. But yeah, I don't sympathize with their claims on white genocide unless like white people were actually being lined up in front of firing squads or something like that.
So that's absolutely not happening. And
Yeah,
basically, like,
I
if you
don't
look
think so either.
if you look at things like genocide, it's very broad. It's basically if you target a group of people for, if you target to limit their population, like if you're in a country to support migrants into that country, like people do in Europe, then that is actually a mild form of genocide because you are actively limiting the reproductive ability of the natives at the expense of migrants. You basically tax the people live there so they get poor because of the welfare spent on migrants, and that's nothing. That's not going back into the country, because justification for taxation is that people borrow so that you will get it back. Or else it's theft, but it could technically be theft, but they give back something of equal value. So that's basically taxation should be either redistribute. Should either be it's basically forced. You loan something, they loan something for you, and then give you back something else. That's basically what taxation are. It is a form of compensation you get for your redistributed property. So taxation, by definition, is redistribution with compensation. So if the taxes taken from you and spent on others, then that's by definition, this goes back into the economy, that would be redistribution without compensation. And that is actually a violation of property rights.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even if you accept taxation wouldn't be theft, but then you have to accept that you need to go back to the system. You need to go back to the citizens. Wait, I just need to open a window.
All right.
And that would make it, that's the only thing that makes it justified, because you're giving it back. But if you just give it to migrants to get their welfare, then you are taking from the host population. And that's actually the same thing as what the British Empire did to the in native peoples they discovered all over the world, if that makes any sense. It's not really different, it's the same thing. But it's even worse, because at least then the natives got infrastructure, but now the people here just get their money stolen and their country flooded with people who doesn't have their culture or doesn't integrate and doesn't have a positive effect on the natives at all.
Now,
displacement of native people, but without giving them infrastructure. That's basically what it is.
Now, I guess we'll like rewind talking back to France for a moment, because you know, as to how that France is like one of those countries in Europe that be willfully taking mass amounts of Syrian refugees. Some of them that aren't even really refugees, but they're like just criminals LARPing as Syrian refugees.
Oh yeah, that's very common.
Yeah,
It's very, and most people, they aren't even from Syria. They're basically from other countries. They're mostly economic migrants. And it's even gone so bad is that I need to go back in history in France. Is that certain part of France? Wait.
Okay. Hello again, Night Shift. I already said hello to you in the chat, but I thought I'd just say in voice, hello, Night Shift. Anyway,
Thanks.
what you say about?
Oh, I can continue now. Is that
what the heck you doing wearing an American ball cap?
It's not American. It's Breton. Look at it.
It's what?
It's Breton. It's black and white. Look at it's not stars.
Okay, never mind. What is it supposed to be? Some kind of football team or something?
No, it's a indigenous historical nation that was colonized by France, who is still colonized by France.
Okay.
It's a flag of Brittany. So the France, they're basically a lot of what's seen as France isn't actually France. They're basically in France they have what they call what I call fringe minorities. You know what that is? Should I explain it?
Actually, I kind of want to rewind on what I was trying to bring up earlier. Talking about
that's what I'm doing.
Oh, talking about the Syrian refugees thing.
Yeah, I know. No, that's why I'm explaining this. I need to do it to like,
all right,
so you can get the full picture because it's kind of complicated.
If this ties into the whole Syrian refugees thing, well, then I guess go on.
It's basically this that the like part like the the western peninsula of France, and the southern France is called Occitania. Part of the west is called Alsace and Aquitania, and part of the north is called Nord de Calais. And all those regions in France basically are colonized areas that have a different native indigenous ethnicity. What the French have been doing is they have been forcing those people to become French by trying to exterminate the indigenous people's language. If you're following. So what they did to the they did to the Bretons was that if school children spoke Breton, then they will give them a rope of shame, and if the kid who had and when another kid spoke Breton, they give it to the other kid, and the kid who had to get a beating from the teacher, discourage the parents from learning the children to speak Breton, so that everybody should just speak. And I don't know the same part about what happened to the rest of the but Occitan and to be very, very big languages, but because of immigration, Breton and Occitan, at least, have been replaced as the third most spoken ones by Arabic, and that's because of immigration. So they're basically united the indigenous people being, and then the immigrants, they force the people and
okay,
so
you have to so wait, all the people from Brittany, they're being forced practically to speak French, but all the incoming Syrian refugees are not being forced to speak French before they become citizens. I mean,
they're trying to make immigrants they're trying to get rid of their, but they're less. So the result is that because they shifted from being assimilation to, so now immigrants have to do less with France than these even though they lived in their home country. So peoples and force them, and then they're inviting people and don't force them to, at least doesn't succeeding for it.
Hold on a second. We're kind of starting to lose you, JWille. JWille, your connection is kind of cutting up right now. JWille, you were like cutting out very badly for like a couple minutes there. I would suggest that you leave the call and then try to come back, JWille. If you can hear me anyways. The ideology of man-made climate change is wrong, says Angel. It is a Nazi ideology. I do not know of how climate change is in connection to Nazism, honestly, Angel. And as far as man-made climate change, overall, I accept that man-made climate change is very well possible, but I just don't think that it's like highly cataclysmic as some people like to try to put it out to be anyway. So therefore, I say don't implement any legislation restricting businesses and whatnot. It's not just France, though. Many others have adopted the philosophy, says Red Feather. I think she's talking about an expansion of JWille's whole monologue about integration into a given culture. Hold on one second, people. JWille has like officially exited the call. Okay. JWille says that he has to use the restroom right now, so he'll be back in a few minutes. But hopefully he ain't like fully cut off or anything like that. Oh, looks like he might be back already. All right, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, I'm back now again. And something else I can bring up with, and that's also a reason.
Damn, your microphone like sounds extra loud right now for some reason. Have to turn down my own volume.
Sorry. No, but I'm backed away from the computer now.
All right. So I did not get the whole thing that you were saying right there, because it seemed like the 2 minutes before that you had like left the call, you had you were getting consistently cut out. So I did not catch all of that. Something about integration into a society when you're immigrating or something regarding France.
Oh yeah, I said that the native minorities who aren't French, who the French have colonized, they have more pressure. Like we had more pressure to be integrated into France than the immigrants are coming now, because they shifted from being focused from assimilations to integration. So, and basically they give us no support at all of our own native languages in the school curriculum at all. So we need to do it privately. And that's also the problem with having this imperialist unitary state, because if we would have a federation, then we used to have our own language rather than French to also be taught in school, which we would like to. But France and Paris, they are a unitary state instead of a federation. And that's why a federation is much better. I hope I didn't cut out now. I hope I was better.
No, you were clear. But on that point, I take a question expounding on that point. I take it that France is not a federal government?
No, well, it's not a federation, so to speak. Like the federal government of the United States is the opposite, is the non-federal system. Like the federal government is the state full state authority, whereas the local government, that's federalism, if that makes sense.
I don't think I caught that necessarily. You want to reword your statement there?
Sure. It's that if federalism, that is having the local governments deciding more, whereas a unitary state is deciding.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? That's kind of an ironic thing when it comes to defining what federalism is, because I know that Mark Levin goes talking about this a whole lot. I don't. You probably never heard of him, but he goes talking about our founding fathers like George Washington and John Adams, for example. Even though that they're called technically Federalists, they were actually anti-Federalists more than anything. And what you're saying is that the more unitary government, that is when the federal government controls more of everything.
Yeah, like the more the federal government controls, the less federal is the country.
Yeah, definitely
And
kind of an oxymoron on terms, but apparently humanity has accepted that oxymoron. But go on.
Yeah, it basically is what it means. If the federal government, that means less federal control. The federal system is less federal. It's more unitary. The federal government has no control, then it's a complete federation.
Mm-hmm.
And also believe that it's the right, like the right for certain local places to secede from the country, to form their own country. Because a lot of the problem with South Africa is that all the more prosperous regions, they are supporting the poor regions of the country. So it's also both South Africa and France are examples of unitary states. There are unitary states and not federations.
Right. And it gets even worse with international governments. Like you have the EU, for example, that is like, which is basically like trying to implement Articles 11 and 13, I think it is, and just implementing new copyright laws in general to like make people have to pay out the ass just for providing a link for their sources and, you know, copyright of memes and so forth.
The only reason they do it is because their cronies are going to get more power.
Mm-hmm.
Like people say, "Oh, there's capitalism." No, it's the opposite of capitalism.
These new copyright laws, the opposite of capitalism. I can agree, and these copyright laws are also an example as to why I am against international governments. I mean, if a unitary government is bad, then an international government is even worse. That's how I would put it.
Yeah, the kind of like defeats the purpose. The only reason why you justify having any form of international law is to protect the citizens from the governments, not to govern them more.
Yeah, like I can imagine that was like the original intent of the UN, for example, and the Geneva Convention is to make sure that no citizens get needlessly killed, or even like military members get needlessly tortured for information or anything like that. I can understand the humanitarian side of things, but at the same time, it seems to be a very dangerous precedent and one way or another taking us closer to like sort of a one world government or something like that. That's just my layman's observation on that anyways. And back on France and the whole Syrian refugee thing, like, you know, the France or Paris bombing, the one that claimed 100 lives, something like that. And the people that were like carrying out the attack, they were found to be like ISIS influenced.
Yeah,
ISIS members.
That happens in France because of the migration problems that they got there. Because of migration, they basically things like that can happen more, and they actually lied to the public and tried to like obscure what happened so that people would not become xenophobic. So they basically just lied about what,
quote unquote.
Yeah, and because like that would be, oh no, that would be terrible, the racist and stuff like that. Which is like, so what? like, it's a controversial idea I have. Racism is not a bad thing. It's neutral. I think I might be the only person to think that. No, very few people think that, but I do.
I will say,
I will defend that.
I will say that generally racism is a bad thing. I mean, especially in the areas of like instituting a racial ethno-state or racial segregation, like anything that is governmentally enforced along those lines, and even like just looking down upon a race as inferior. But say something like jokes, racist jokes, if those are legitimately by definition racist, well, then that would be, if you want to go off on a limb, then comedians, even though they might technically be kind of racist with the race jokes that they play with, then I guess in that it would be one area that racism is not inherently immoral. But generally speaking, I still do say that racism is immoral.
Well, yeah, I guess you could make that exemption if you believe that it's immoral. I said it. I don't think it's bad. Like, I don't think, like, because if you take away, like, I think the segregation, but I don't think it's bad because it's racist. I think the segregation is bad because it's going to force separation people who are law-abiding citizens, and that is wrong, because you are technically that's wrong. It's wrong because it's forced separation, not because it's racist. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if you force people to be apart who want to be together, like,
yeah,
who are innocent,
forced segregation and forced separation in general, especially for innocent people that did not a thing wrong, like you just mentioned, just in general, whether it be racially charged or religiously or politically charged or charged through gender or sexual orientation and whatnot. It's just bad in general.
Yeah, and it's so funny when people bring up the lie about American politics when it comes to the shift that the bad part of the Democratic Party about racism and all of that left over to the Republican Party, which is like such a huge lie. It's because if you look at who are the ones that are in favor of mandate and segregation, it's still the Democrats, like it was before. So what happened? Where's the shift? You get it?
Angel is in the chat saying, I'm very racist when it comes to French people.
But look at me. The Bretons are also a lot of racist when it comes to French people, okay? This happened to me when in Brittany, when I told them that a lot of were French descendants, most of them, because most of them are. He said, wait, weren't they Dutch? Well, they're both. Oh. And then I said, like, well, I guess it's unfortunate that you have to deal with them. So basically, there is.
But I want to say the reason why I was bringing up the Paris attack was that would be like an example as to where that the French people, like, they need. It's a good idea that you have an armed populace in France in that area. I mean, especially if you're going to like continuously keep on taking in these refugees, not knowing really what their ideological drive is or whatever. And apparently the ideological drive of those people that carried out the Paris attack, it was an extreme violent one to where that
it was an act of jihad.
Exactly. Exactly. I do want to ask. The Saitan atheist? Oh, right. Yeah. I got you.
If you watch him once, when he says all the thing about Islam, you have to stay that way forever because it's so hilarious.
Right. Jihad.
Have you seen the one with Linda Sarsour and Yasmin Habugdabagdi from Australia when they talk about jihad in the cartoon? Have you seen that one?
I don't think I have. I'm not subscribed and haven't watched a whole lot of Saitan.
Okay, so we go back to the main point. I just wanted to ask that because it's so funny.
Yeah. I've only really watched him in 2016 and 2017 primarily. Haven't watched him a whole lot in the last couple of years. But anyway, what I was wanting to say, Hugo mentioning earlier that South Africa has some strict gun control regulations, but in France, are they even stricter there? Or what's your observation on that?
Oh gosh, I think they're basically saying, like, the reason why I'm not as into gun control, like, that doesn't really think about it so much compared to South Africa, is because if you live in South Africa and France, you know this. In South Africa, you're always like very watchful with you. Basically, when you're outside, you basically are very aware about your surroundings all the time, so that nothing bad happens to you. And that's the reason why wanting to be armed is a very good thing that you want there.
Mm-hmm.
In France, in Britain at least, then I usually feel safe because I am in an ethnic majority. Well, that's not the reason I feel safe, but that contributes to my sense of belonging. And technically, that makes me feel a little bit safe because I know that I have a certain kinship with the other people, if that makes sense. And it's so very much a well-run society. So basically, the need for wanting to be armed is less. Like, there's less demand for guns. So I think the regulation might be less or more because people doesn't protest against it, or because that might be why it's more, or it might be less because the people doesn't really feel the need to have guns. So therefore, politicians doesn't feel the need to regulate guns. But it should be lower because in France it is quite hard to get a license, though, because it's very little forest, so it's very little hunting, and that's a bit of a problem because it leads to people having less justifications for guns, and because safer is another less justifications for gun ownerships. But when there's migration, like we see that if we had people with guns, as we would, or if people in France could easily access guns, then that thing what happened there in the terrorism in France, that would not happen. So they should have more guns. So I would say yeah.
In France?
Yeah, more easy for law-abiding citizens to buy guns.
Okay. You go mentioning I don't know, I might be misquoting you here, but it seemed like you were saying something along the lines of you feel safer because you're not in the ethnic minority or something like that.
Yeah. Not entirely, but sort of. It's basically, I feel that there isn't any form of animosity towards me as being a foreign, a different and other, as I would feel otherwise. And it basically, if you look at Bretons are far less likely to commit crimes than most other peoples.
Now,
So it sounds so horribly racist, but it's just true. We are less criminal than most others, probably because we have less reasons to be criminals, like I guess. And also, if you live in a country where you are basically like the rest, when you are the norm, it's basically you can't be targeted for not being part of the in group. People attack you, that would be for different reasons, but nobody would say, "Oh my God, this person is not like us, therefore we should beat that," which is something that could happen otherwise. Typically, of South Africa, people target people of different ethnicities for violence quite often, and that's basically, it's horrendous because people gang up on people of different ethnicity and then beat their shit or kill them or rape them, and that's a horrible reality that is, and what people might believe, it's the majority of people who are doing it is black ethnicities killing other black ethnicities because they have history of being enemies.
I want to like read some that was further up in the chat that I saw was interesting. Do not know what your take is on it. Nightshift 10,000 says, besides, South African Zulus are standing with the South African whites. Now, as I typically hear the Zulus, they're like native African black people, basically.
Ooh, you need to know something about South Africa, okay? The native people in South Africa, they are the San followed by the Khoi. The Khoi, they're collectively known as Khoi San, okay? They are not black people.
Okay, but is there like a strand of Zulus that have lived in South Africa for a time?
Yeah, the Zulu people, they're not going to explain it, how this works. The entire country were populated by Khoisan, right? Not black people, then indigenous people in Southern Africa, right? Did you know that the native people of Southern Africa were not black?
Okay, that's odd. So
yeah,
there were like
many people don't know that.
So, but okay, were they brown then or olive skinned or something?
Yeah, they were more like brown. Like they are related. Like look at this. Imagine that we have sub-Saharan Africans. Okay, you know sub-Saharan people.
Right.
There are two races of sub-Saharan, two distinctions. One is called the Capoid race, and the black race. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the black people are indigenous to like sort of the central, west, and sort of eastern Africa. Okay, Capoid are native to the eastern coast of Africa, all the way down to southern Africa. Okay, and that only changed when black people started to like migrate to the other areas. Like if you look at the Central Africa, the native peoples are the Pygmies, and the Southern Africa, the native people are the Khoisan, which are Capoid race, and the Pygmies are black race. Then West Africans, one type of West African called the Bantu peoples, they basically expanded out of West Africa and to Central and Southern Africa. There were a lot of genocides that took part in that. It started from the Roman Empire time and basically ended, not the genocide, but the expansion of the Bantu people from West Africa, and basically ended with colonization. And the first Bantu people who reached the southern parts of Africa, they were called the peoples, right? But the Sotho-Tswana people basically founded several new peoples, right? So over the times, the Sotho-Tswana people became the Sotho and the Tswana, and the Sotho-Tswana people lived in southern Africa at the same time in what's now South African neighboring countries. At the same time, where Europeans, mostly the Dutch East India Company, came to the Cape, which is the opposite side of the country as where the black Sotho-Tswana people lived. So they had no contact for 100 years, more or less. And then a lot of Nguni people, which are newer arrival, other Bantu people, which come later than the Sotho-Tswana people, they basically came, and one of the most powerful Nguni and were the Zulus. And the Zulus people basically exterminated the Khoisan people who lived within the area which the Zulu kingdom is based, so to speak. And something called Mfukane, which is called the crushing, where the Zulu people basically wiped clean a huge part of land inhabited by Sotho-Tswana people and Khoisan people, and they also caused the Xhosa people, which are a different descendants of the Nguni people, who are like the Nguni people became Xhosa, Zulus, and other peoples, and all of them have a very history of war and violence. And then after that time, which was the 1800s, the Zulu tribe, the Zulu kingdom was formed in the 1800s. Okay, that's 200 years. Almost 200 years after, 150 years after the Dutch East India Company came, right? And then when the British Empire took the Cape Colony from the VOC, which are shorting for the Dutch East India Company, they basically banned Dutch and Afrikaans, which caused the Boer to leave, which are descendants of the Dutch and the French, and Germans. They basically left the British controlled Cape Colony and founded their own distinct Boer republic. And the reason why they managed to do that was because the Zulu tribe had basically wiped clean a lot of stretch of land where other black tribes have already lived. So that basically they were free to settle. But the British people were worried about aggression from the Zulus and the Boer republics on the Sotho people. So they basically created Lesotho. South Africa had a hole in it. And basically had the Zulu kingdom because they wanted to Europe. A war for greed. British Empire, I know. So they basically committed genocide against the Afrikaner people, and the Zulu people did not with the wheel or any modern technology when they were battling the British and the Boer republics. And that's the only reason the British Empire could win against two enemies at once, by genocide, and because one was so far back in their development of weaponry. They basically had spears, but they didn't have wheels. When they battled the British Empire, this kingdom.
So, if I may try to ask to get the timeline straight here. So basically, the Khoisan, they were like the original indigenous people of the South African region. And then the Zulus conquered that land away from the Khoisan. And then the British came into South Africa.
Oh, the Zulus didn't conquer all of it. They just conquered a very little part of it. So, and the Zulu people, and the Zulu people, the Zulu nation and the Zulu ethnicity, that came about after the Nguni came to what's now South Africa, and then they became the Zulus. So the Zulus didn't really exist before coming to South Africa. So you can say the Zulu people are a native ethnicity to South Africa in the same way as the Afrikaners are a native ethnicity to South Africa. Because because it's different between native is any ethnicity or individual who are from a certain area, whereas the indigenous are the peoples, the racial group who are the oldest living descendants of the oldest population that inhabited that area. So in the United States, it would be the Native American Indians who would be the indigenous people. But technically, ethnic Americans and Black Americans and Prussian Americans, Franco Americans, Hibernian Americans, Italian Americans, anytime, all of these would be native ethnicities, but they would not be indigenous, if that makes sense.
This is all pretty interesting information and history right here regarding South Africa, but I want to bring it back a little bit. Is something about ethnicity, like being an ethnic minority or whatnot. When you say when you go talking about ethnic minorities, you're not necessarily meaning racial minorities, are you?
Well, not real. Technically, that kind of depends if.
For example, Bretons are white people though, but they're still considered an ethnic minority in France.
Yeah, they are definitely. It's basically definitely an ethnic minority because the majority of the people in France are not Bretons, and Bretons basically only exist in 3 regions in the entire country. So we are definitely not. We are a minority, just like the Black French are a minority. Both are ethnic minorities. One is a racial minority.
I see.
Well, technically, you could.
I do want to say, though, that on a comment that you have made a lot earlier, that I would feel more comfortable around people that I am similar with ideologically speaking, that I more than ethnically. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only reason why it's easy with ethnically is because there want to be an ethnic animosity towards you. So that's something that cannot, by definition, happen if you are the same people.
I mean, that depends if people like politicize their own ethnicity or race.
Oh yeah,
Like
I guess that's true.
I don't try to politicize my own pasty ass pigmentation, for example.
No, neither do I. I don't try to politicize any ethnicity. I just basically, if one certain ethnicity are under attack, then they need to defend themselves. That's basically what I'm saying.
Mm.
So basically, if the Breton language is under attack, and because multiculturalism is coming to France could spread to Brittany, then I do believe that it's good for people to think in a defensive position about their ethnicity if they want them to be defended. But they should not try to seek out and oppress others. And they should not have, like, I am technically identitarian, but I am against identity politics. Do you want me to elaborate?
That sounds like that actually does sound like a bit of a contradiction right there. An identitarian who is against identity politics.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would think that an identitarian is somebody who does like politicize their own racial or ethnic identity.
No, not necessarily, because a person who's identitarian doesn't really have to go very political about it. It's basically more of a defending your own ethnicity's existence and interests, which always are in the side of the other people, almost entirely. Like, for example, there's one ethnicity's interest to not be suffer for discrimination, for example.
Well, yeah,
it's not identity politics. Then basically, if that means that I want us to stop being discriminated against.
Yeah, but I would think that would fall under that. I would define that as egalitarianism, not identitarianism.
Personally. No, it's not. It doesn't have to be identitarianism, but if you are, but look, you can be an identitarian and against identity politics, because when I talk about identitarianism, I basically talk about that you don't want your own people to shrink in your own in your own land when you are already majority, if that makes sense.
I guess it does, but I don't know. I guess I don't really understand that, mainly because I cannot really sympathize or empathize with it, rather, because personally, I don't really care that much. You know how people like make the projection supposedly that America is going to become like majority brown or something in about 40, 50 years or something like that? Or not majority brown, but at least white people will become more of a minority. You know that talking point?
Yeah, I know that, but it's just that the reason why people do that is because they want the Democrats to get more power,
right?
Because of racial voting patterns,
and I guess
the reason why.
And I guess the reason why I bring that up is because I guess the reason why I cannot really empathize with what you brought up earlier about not wanting to be a racial minority is because I don't really care, honestly, if white people were to become overall a minority in America. I mean, what concerns me more is if like people of my own ideology became a minority, like conservative, libertarian, anything along those lines. And that's where kind of it comes down to stereotypes, you know, where people go talking about generally brown or black people, like they vote Democrat more than anything else, you know. But I think that's where we need to make the case to teach people of other races to be, you know, teach them about conservatism and libertarianism rather than force or try to coerce the population to be one way or another, racially speaking, anyways.
Oh yeah, that's technically true. Is that that's actually something that's good. But if you take South Africa, for example, the governing party have affirmative action, which discriminates against all minorities who are not black.
Oh yeah, I'm against affirmative action, by the way.
Yeah, vote against it, but they are the minorities, so it doesn't matter. even though they are the majority in Western Cape. Okay, that doesn't matter because the government decides affirmative action. That means affirmative everywhere, even though the Western Cape doesn't want it. So, and if you have affirmative action in your country, not as severe, then that's bad. But if you are the minority, then it's going to be even worse. Like being on the doesn't have affirmative action if you are the majority is something that not going to affect you as much as giving affirmative action to a majority, which is going to affect a minority far worse than the other way around, if that makes sense. So I think that America becoming 45% white isn't really bad in itself, but I think that.
But by the way, I do want to say I do want to say if you see me shaking my head, it's not at you, it's the chat. But sorry, go on.
I don't think it's bad if America would become 45% white because, okay, I think it would be bad if you still have these notions of white privilege and notions of affirmative action and white supremacy, and if you still have this racial voting gap. Like if you solve that first, then being a white minority would technically be okay. But you need to fix that before you become a minority, if that makes sense.
All right. You want say for example, brown people like Mexicans, you want it to be more 50-50 as far as what the ideologies is before people stop caring, before white people stop caring about being a minority.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, actually, or they can do this.
Or am I misinterpreting what you're saying?
I think that the racial voting gap must close. And if you look at Cubans, there is no racial voting gap. If you look at people from, I don't know.
I know
if you
that.
look at Sweden, then there is Democrat bias. Cuba is Republican bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of national origin on the immigration. It's very easy to. So it's not really that simple white and people of color think when it comes to voting. It's basically country of origin is more important. More race becomes people already American citizens. But honestly, if you look at countries like the Congo, if people coming from the Congo or people coming from, I don't know, Nicaragua, do you think they're going to vote for what the Democrats provide with handouts because they are a minority? Or are they going to vote for, technically people tend to vote for what, the Democrats' policies is very can be appealing to people who come from third world countries because it means things that, oh my God, free things, you get it? And that's not really anything to do with race, to be honest, but it's something that have to do with the reality about of immigration to the United States. I think that if you look at, for example, Eastern Europe, then would probably almost entirely vote Democrats, and they are technically white. But the Middle East and Scandinavia wouldn't, even though they're also white. And even though Hispanic and Latino is Venezuela and Cuba, they would more likely vote Republican. And other Hispanic and Latino would be Central America, and they would vote more Democrat. And that's sort of and therein lies the problem is there is not, you can't give people an incentive to you can't give people these racial identity politics stuff to people, to immigrants to your country, because then they're going to vote for the people who give them it's an incentive. And you have to get rid of all the identity politics first before and until you have done it, you need to maintain the demographics so that it doesn't shrink, which are against your political favor. Because if you want people who are more likely to vote the way you do, then you've probably more chances that people would look similar to you, generally speaking. Just the way it is. And
I guess
it's nothing that we can decide over or control, but that's just how it generally is. I am against presuming people, an individual, oh, you are probably going to be this ideology because of your race. That's wrong. But to say that they're collective, it's generally one thing. It's factually correct, and there is nothing wrong with recognizing that and take it into consideration when making political decisions. And there is a reality that certain people tend to vote a certain way. So if they become the majority, then that would not be good for you, unfortunately. But yeah, so basically, if you want to, if you should stop caring about the racial makeup of your country, you need to get rid of the identity politics first and the voting bias first, and then it would not matter, because the reason why I say it does matter is just because of that um, gap between
the ideological gap.
graphics.
Right. I mean, I guess I would still have to disagree on the way to approach the subject. But that might be like a discussion for a different time. Although I do kind of want to I think I do kind of want to mention something else. Like, I don't know about how it is with you, but generally speaking, here in America, when I would come across somebody who is like an immigrant from Africa, and more specifically a black immigrant from Africa, they tend to be a little bit more right-leaning, or at least have a little bit more of a right-leaning attitude than a black person born in America. Or at least that's my personal observation. Not mean to
that's true.
Sound racist or anything like that, but I don't know. That just seems to be my general observation, personally.
No, actually, I agree with that. That is true. I do definitely have seen that patterns, because if you look at all the right-wing blacks, they're basically almost entirely immigrants in your country. So that's basically the reason why having African immigration isn't really bad, because African immigrants tend to be more right-leaning. So having them as growing is your benefit. But if you have quotas and race-based laws in your country, which you do, that is something that's still having more people of a certain race that get that. Like by definition, because you have quotas and stuff like that, harm your economy in certain ways, which is that's not even their own fault. It's the fault of the left for pitting people against one another. And that's why I wanted to stop doing it. Because if you look at the Green New Deal, they want to abolish the electoral college, right? And then you're going to be imperialized from the largest part of the country, right? And therefore might be hostile towards a minority, not technically based on race or ethnicity, but mostly based on policy and power. Then you will be ruled, and the right-wing parts of the United States would be ruled by left-wing parts, just as Brittany and the Western Cape is ruled by the French and South African government, respectively, without any freedom. So the way of not seeing race is if you might result in you sacrificing your perfect economic system, because that's the reason why I want the economic system to be the way, the system to be federal. And if the demographic changed, then that system could change, especially if you look at policies proposed by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, Cory Booker, and Robert O'Rourke, okay, then it's not, you're not really going to win on that. And if you have more immigration from certain countries, or have a racial shift in your country, then the reason the Green New Deal might abolish, I don't think most Democrats are even in favor of that, but if they eventually manage to abolish the electoral college, which a lot of Democrats want to do, then being a minority in a place like South Africa and France sucks. And if they win, and they would win if the demographic shifts, then being a minority in America would suck too. But being a minority in America now isn't as bad as it would be if the Democrats discriminated against a minority. So if you kind of get what I'm going at, is that it's basically the opposite to identity politics as to why I think that America is better off being majority white. And the most people who have said that to me have been Black Americans, so it's not like it should matter, but I feel the irrational need to throw that out, unfortunately. But
with the way that you go explaining your own thoughts when it comes to whether or not it's a good idea for like one ethnicity or one race to be a majority or not, the way that you like expound on it, it doesn't sound outright that terrible. But I guess the statement by itself, it's best if a country is majority white. That statement by itself, merely by itself, doesn't seem that appealing. Just me personally, but the way that you're explaining it is that if you can like narrow the ideological gap within a racial group, then it'll become less of an issue, is your opinion.
Yeah, and as I said that,
and like I said, I guess I would have like a slight disagreement with that, but it just doesn't it doesn't sound as bad as I have heard it before. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, that's because I'm very considerate about that. Is because that's the reason why I want a federal system, because you can have, like, if, for example, if you look at the Midwest, for example, it's mostly Prussian American, meaning German descendant. If you look at parts of the New England, it's mostly Acadian, Hibernian American, meaning Irish descendants. New York, Italo American in the largest group. And if you look at the Black Belt, mostly Black American. If you look at the southwest in America, it's mostly Hispanic and Latino. And if you look at the upper South, it's mostly ethnic American. And with ethnic American, I mean Anglo-Americans who came before the independence, like the people of like the British and Dutch settlers. You get what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean. You're talking about like the people, the generations that have like lived in the colonies before, before more Germans or Irish or British came into the country after the country was founded.
Exactly, and we see the English-dominated Mormon corridor with Utah and similar areas. So if you see this is diversity. There is no majority in the United States by ethnicity, and so but that's the reason, and that diversity is good. But but all these people have their majority areas, for example, and it's not unreasonable for someone who would be I don't know, like if you, for example, are certain, if you are I don't know what ethnicity I should pick. If you say the German belt, for example, if you like the German belt being majority Prussian American, like I would not understand why you would that you would probably not like certain if certain parts became, or a state there who's majority Prussian would become majority Hispanic. Like it's normal for a lot of these German-derived peoples to not want to be the minority in that place, and basically the same could say about the historically Hispanic part, or Black parts, and yeah, that's all right, but that doesn't. So I think that in all large countries, demographics shouldn't matter, and actually doesn't matter unless you have discrimination. But if you have a federal system, it doesn't matter. If for example, it doesn't matter that Wisconsin is majority Prussian because Tennessee is mostly ethnically American. So both these people are still the majority in their respective states, and that's something that they're willingly, if they can still move freely, that they should. I believe in completely free association, okay, within countries' borders. But people tend to, certain parts of the country are more ethnically different from others, and people tend to not want to leave that, because why would you, if you are culturally inclined to one specific area? Then, and the people who have the same, if you look at places, like, people tend to balkanize. That's just natural, and that's fine. And I'm completely against forced segregation. That's horrible. And I'm against forced association and forced immigration of certain policies because my neighborhood is considered to be too white. That's just as bad as forced segregation, okay, in my opinion. And so if you look at this, I basically relate forced association, that you force people to be together when they don't want to. Of course, government policies should never discriminate. So all citizens are equal under the law.
Yeah.
No position there should be allowed. That's unacceptable, because then it wouldn't be voluntary discrimination. It would be enforced discrimination, and that's unacceptable. But to say like, you need to bake the cake, then you're forcing people to associate with other people, and that's just as bad as forced dissociation, in my opinion. I actually would say that anti-discrimination laws leads to rape culture, because that means that you have an entitlement to other people's body, even if they say no. And there is no irrational reason for not having sex with someone. So what they do with their body and their income is their business, even though their income is already being borrowed in order to be repaid into the system. So it's justified, unless it goes to a different part of the country, which is ethnically or culturally different, because then you are redistributing the productivity from one group of people. That's wrong. That's why federal system is better. And if you have anti-discrimination laws, that just leads to do something with other people's body. That is a slippery slope towards rape culture.
I don't.
Okay,
I don't believe. All right, go on.
They basically say that they basically say, if I don't want to have sex with people of both genders, then I'm discriminating. So if you are heterosexual, homosexual, you are discriminating. Anti-discrimination would mean no, you cannot be picky with the genders you fuck. And people say that's far off. But why are Punjabi women being legally penalized for not wanting to wax Jessica Janine's balls? So the thing about anti-discrimination laws leading to rape culture is being confirmed. I was right about that. I have the proof. The proof is all over, plastered over the internet. I was right about that. Other people say that that's not going to happen, but it happened, so I was right.
That is, if the anti-discrimination laws was to extend all the way to, like, marital affairs and stuff like that. Anti-discrimination laws, as far as I know, here in America, has only extended in regards of affirmative action, which affirmative action actually, ironically, is kind of discriminatory, and also the whole you're not allowed the right to deny service to a gay person for being gay, like we kind of have touched on there. But yeah, technically, it is discriminatory. For a person to be picky and choosy on who, based on gender or even race, for who they want to marry and so forth. So technically, if you want to, like, pull up the definition, it would be milquetoast sexism or racism or whatever, but it's not necessarily bigotry, hatred, or intolerance. See you later, Red Feather.
If you sorry.
And I do want to say, like, I don't know how much you watch of Steven Crowder, but I used to watch him quite a bit. And there was, like, this one response video that he did to the Young Turks talking about these bodybuilders, that they basically use brown spray tan or something like that because having brown or black skin, like, makes them look bulkier or something. And then Steven Crowder was all like, is it racist? Well, by definition, yes, it is. But is it hateful or bigoted? No. And I guess if a person like Steven Crowder can come to a kind of a conclusion like that, well, then I guess I can too. So by extension, on that same issue, when it comes to, like, who you want to marry, it does fall kind of under that, but it's not hateful or anything like that.
Well, I would say not really, because racism applies that other people are better. And if I want to have kids with someone who's Breton, or then
that's what the definition should mean. what should be.
And also, like personally, I'm gay, so I only date men, but I'm not
You
really
sexist.
Yeah, I know. By definition, I would be, but there's nothing wrong with that. And also, I am technically like I don't have any preference for someone being cisgender or transgender. Like that is something I'm okay with. But you have
You're
to
not
be
pulling a Riley Dennis, in other words.
No, like I could be with someone who's trans. Like I could be, but
No, I mean
have a very
you're not pulling a Riley Dennis. In other words, you're bashing people over the head that basically you must date a trans person. You must date a trans person.
Yeah, exactly. That's the same reason. Like, I'm against that because like there are people who could date trans people. So why the fuck is she complaining about it? Like I even use her pronouns so she can shut the fuck up. Okay, and also like, but I'm very straight when it comes to height. I'm not gonna date guys who are significantly taller or shorter than me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not going to do it. And I'm not going to date a guy who is. All guys I've been attracted to have been either of European, Levantine, or Fenno-Urgic background. Like, I've never been attracted to a man outside of that specific racial category. And that's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very strict when it comes to race, when it comes to who I'm going to date. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that people are saying that it's racist, even though it's actually not racist at all. It's basically just it's basically just logic. No, it's basically just who I am. Like attracted to women, then telling me then I'm not. I'm not attracted to people outside of this races I mentioned. Then I'm not. Like that's it. It's not really. Like I don't understand why people would have a problem with that. Like that's basically saying that, oh my god, how dare you not fuck with someone? Like what? Like no, forcing people that's rape. Like yeah, but you shouldn't want to. Yeah, but so what? I do. Like it's the same thing with gender and race. It's according to some people. So people that say that homosexuality and heterosexuality is fine, but you cannot discriminate based on race. Like when it comes to dating, that they're being hypocritical.
I do kind of want to ask one question before we take out of here because we just passed the 2-hour mark right now.
Oh no. Sure, but go on.
Was there something in further that you wanted to say about that, or were you pretty much done in wrapping up your whole spiel about that?
Well, I wanted to say something else. Is that if you look at, I do tend to like diversity. So a diverse country would need to be federalized because that means that if I am the majority in Brittany, it doesn't matter if I'm the majority in Paris because I'm not. But if you have a unitary state, being a minority would technically lead to, in a democracy, you can be oppressed by the majority if they want to, which majority of people of color in America who vote for Democrats technically wants to oppress white people, so to speak. And so that's basically why people say that having them as majority would be a negative. But if you still have a federal system, then you will be then being a minority in the country isn't a bad thing because you will still have your states or provinces or certain countries where you are the majority. So so that's only an issue as long as you don't live in a federation. That's why federation is the only way forward and the only way I believe diverse societies can survive because or else certain areas would be exploited by others. And also people say, oh, I'm a libertarian to a certain extent. That's the reason why I want federalism, because if you truly want something, because a lot of people are not going to agree with wanting a libertarian society. So if you have a very, very federalized society where everything is very localized, then then if one state wanted to become more libertarian, you could do that without the permission of California. And the California can still be California as they want
or California.
Exactly, but then places like Mississippi Or, I don't know, mention a very libertarian state in your country.
I'd say the closest it gets is New Mexico, who like voted in. Well, actually, no. Gary Johnson was a Republican when he was governor. Minnesota has had a third party. Has had a third party candidate become governor, that being Jesse Ventura. Also, I think Vermont is like one of the closer states to become more libertarian, so forth. But I don't know. But go on with your point.
Yeah, and basically, I would just say that that's the reason why. That's the reason why how libertarianism is best implemented, if with the help of federalism. So I would say that libertarians and federalism are just natural allies in the political scheme, whole political scheme of this, and federalism would just naturally just drift towards the right, because it rejects the whole idea of redistribution. Because if you have one state paying more, like in South Africa, Western keep paying so much more than they get back, right? Then they're basically being exploited, and they are racially and ethnically distinct from other places. So it's a racial discrimination. So they basically got redistribution the property of a certain political area to another, and that's wrong. I believe it's in a federalist system. Then you can keep your money. Then you would have, like I said, the taxation. You're getting taxed, and then the money is going to be given back to you in the same system. But if you have, that's in a federal system. But if you have a non-federal system, a unitary system, the money is going to be taken from you in your area and be given to people in a different part of the country, in different area, state or province or county, who are not doing as good as you are. So that's basically redistribution without compensation. But if it goes back into your own communities, redistribution with compensation. And I actually would say that if you have a federation with different states and provinces, some states would be more federal amongst their own counties than when some states would be more unitary, because the counties aren't really that, have not the resources to function on their own in all their levels. So even between different federal entities within a federation, it would be different they would be decentralized to a certain extent. What I said is that the decentralization of America is what makes it good. And that's the reason what makes South Africa and France so bad, because you get diversity, and because you have a federation, it works good. We don't. That it works bad. So I said, if you have, and just because federalism drifts towards the right, because it rejects the whole idea of people being the same, and people being equal, people will have it differently in a federal system, because they do differently, have different resources in different cultures, and are just not as good as each other, as performing and building a good society. Then that becomes more right, and more of the left. They basically want more open borders, like the welfare, the redistribution, and federalism is less a leftist ideology because it doesn't redistribute wealth. I'm sorry, I'm just basically going in circles now, but I just want to make everything clear.
All right. So I guess the final question that I want to ask about before we go off is the idea of a Bill of Rights. Like, are you for or against that? Or do you know what the Internet Bill of Rights, more specifically? I forgot to clarify that part. Are you for or against an Internet Bill of Rights, if you even know what that is?
Yeah, I'm for it. I'm for it because monopolized corporations would monopolize, and that's not really good for the organic competition, and that could actually meddle in the democratic outcomes of the elections, and that makes it quite dangerous, because that means the corporations would technically have decision-making power over their own corporations, which means Internet Bill of Rights a good thing.
How would they like intervene in the democratic processes of an election if say Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, for example?
well, if they promote everything left-wing and ban everything right-wing, then, and if they are the monopoly on the website, and people who aren't political are going to go into that political persuasion and be shielded from any other political persuasion. And if they like take down people who are running for office who are right-wing, and the people who are running for office who are left-wing are being promoted by the corporation, not organically, then they are technically meddling with the election. But it's not a problem if there is small corporation, but if there are big, like Google and Twitter, they are so big, so they have an effective monopoly. And that's the reason why I think we need an Internet Bill of Rights, because then they would be able to steer elections, at least have an effect on them.
I do kind of want to say that Facebook seems to be kind of taking a downturn. I don't know, from what I just generally hear anyways, they seem to be like almost going the way of not quite there, because this would be kind of hyperbolic, but almost going the way of MySpace. Twitter seems to still kind of be thriving, but they're getting kind of exposed. There's like a more competition when it comes to those regular social medias like that. I mean, yeah, the Snapchats, the Instagrams, there's Discord and Gab as well. All those, they have like their own different formats of how you chat with everybody, but they're still there. Although YouTube, I will say that there is more of an argument to say that YouTube has a bit more of a hold on the market as far as video uploading goes, because video uploading sites are kind of their own beasts, kind of different from Twitter and Facebook. I mean, you can upload videos right there, but videos are not as easy to find and watch as compared to on YouTube or even on BitChute or Dailymotion and so forth. But the thing is that YouTube is like the biggest one, obviously. But what my thought is, I am against an Internet Bill of Rights, and my thought is, if you want to hurt the monopolization of these companies, the kind of monopoly that they hold on these markets, then that you would take the subsidies away from these companies. And if they are to like perish without the subsidies, well, then I say good thing. I mean, if they were like if they were screwing up by, censoring certain opinions, well, then good riddance.
It's so annoying. She said French guy doesn't understand libertarianism. I was like, Breton.
Okay, I do want to say, Angel, that he's not like an anarcho-capitalist or anything, and neither am I. There are minarchist libertarians as well, or although maybe he's the type of guy that doesn't believe in the term of minarchy, although I don't want to put words in your mouth, Angel. But I do kind of want to say it is kind of hard for me. It is kind of hard for me to call somebody a libertarian if they do believe in an Internet Bill of Rights. Like, no offense on that point. But
yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Because my thought on, Styx Hexenhammer 666, he's supposedly a self-proclaimed minarchist, yet he believes in an Internet Bill of Rights and believes that the internet, in fact, should be turned into a public utility. In my opinion, you kind of lose your... this doesn't necessarily mean that he's a bad person or anything like that, but that kind of sort of makes him lose his libertarian card, just in my personal opinion anyways. Because an Internet Bill of Rights, that is basically dictating how a person is to run their private property. And these websites are the appropriate peoples who own them anyways, their private property. Like, for example, Twitter is Jack Dorsey's private property. I don't think YouTube is technically Susan Wojcicki's private property, because YouTube ultimately is owned by Google, which is owned by Alphabet. So whoever owns Alphabet, YouTube and Google and whatnot, is ultimately their private property. And an Internet Bill of Rights would be dictating them on how to run their private property. I don't like the way that YouTube is running their website in pretty much at least half of their business practices. I don't agree with it, but I think that the government dictating on what speech is to be allowed or not, take over that kind of, those kind of reins from the companies, that is a dangerous precedent in of itself.
Well, I wouldn't really say that. Oh, Bill of Rights is a really important thing. I don't really think that's like it's not something I'm passionate about. If that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. It's kind of the same thing with me and welfare. Like, preferably, I would like the welfare state to be phased out, but I am not like passionately, yeah, let's get rid of Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and food stamps. Although one thing that I am more passionate about is like putting back in the work requirement for applying for food stamps, because Obama took out the work requirement and now anybody can be just like pretty much chronically a lazy bum and still be on food stamps. Like, they aren't required to, actively search for a job or work a job.
Yeah, basically the thing. The problem with Obamacare was that he wanted to enforce it by the federal government, but certain.
Oh, I wasn't talking about Obamacare.
Oh, but I'm doing it now. I know.
Okay.
It's basically certain states could not afford it, so basically enforcing it on them was really bad for their economy. That's one example where the federal government should stay out of the business of the states, because if it were a democratic state, then they would probably want to enforce Obamacare, and if the Republican state didn't want to or couldn't afford it, then forcing them to do so is shitty. It's imperialism. That's it. But I do believe that if you take federalism, want to take away power from to more localized communities, like that is a more libertarian position than what most conservatives and liberals would want to make, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there are some conservatives that don't take the real libertarian position on issues. Like, for example, the right to deny service, freedom of association, bake the cake, that whole situation. The only reason why that they are really against forcing people to bake the cake is based on religion. Like, if it goes against your religion, well, then, yeah, you're allowed to deny service to the gay person or whatever. But then libertarians, they're all like, let it go all out. Let everybody deny service against anyone that they choose based on any reason, not just religion. So in that way, libertarians are, well, obviously more libertarian than conservatives. Conservatives only want to focus on one little fine asset of that issue. Minimum wage laws. Conservatives are all like, the minimum wage was only meant to be a starting wage for somebody. Like, it's not meant to be for somebody to live on for the rest of their life. Whereas libertarians are all like, no, get rid of the minimum wage entirely.
Yeah, that's basically why conservatarians tend to be better than libertarian and conservatives, because conservatarians have a more, like, I think that your conservative ideas combined with libertarianism is much better than libertarianism on its own.
Yeah,
because at least you encourage strong family values and want to preserve something.
I consider myself a conservatarian because I'm about as libertarian as minarchists are when it comes to like a person running their own business, but I'm a little bit more for border control than minarchists are. And also there's the issue of abortion, where I kind of deviate from typical libertarian philosophy on, because personally I think that abortion clinics should be banned. But that's me, and I don't think I think most libertarians are against that idea, but that's how I want my abortion beliefs to be carried out when it comes to defunded law. Yeah, at least defunded, like Planned Parenthood. But even minarchists like agree with that point. But I'm just going to another conservative step forward. But
that's good. I think that's good.
Go on.
It was funny because me and my mother were talking about abortion, so we come to the conclusion that this: if you have abortions, you cannot have an abortion if you're married without your spousal consent. That's what I believe. If you're married to someone, a man or a woman, you can be a lesbian, and you're married to someone and they say, no, you cannot have an abortion. You cannot have an abortion if you're married. That's what I believe. And you can also never have an abortion until you are, unless it is the first trimester. I think you should be allowed to have an abortion the first trimester, either if you are unmarried or if you are married and your spouse, even if there's a woman, consent to you having an abortion. Okay. And
right.
I also believe this, and the reason that we did see that the heartbeat bill was was in the right direction, was better, but we said that it was not so good because we said that it should be a little longer. It should be 12 weeks instead, because some women are stupid and they might not notice when they're pregnant at that time, and we don't need more single mothers on welfare. So I believe that you should be allowed to have an abortion earlier if you're unmarried. Just you don't need another justification, just being in the first trimester and unmarried. Then I said you can have an abortion. Just full stop. But otherwise, I don't support it, and I also believe that people shouldn't be forced to fund abortions, unless I do believe that if there is a state. And the Alabama or Mississippi say, "Hey, we would not want to fund abortion. You shouldn't be able to." And if California said, "We want to fund abortion," then sure, fund abortions. That's what I mean. But the reason why, but I'm not really for abortions, like morally. Though I don't really see a problem with having early abortions, but I would never do it if I was a woman. And if I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her to do it either. Instead, people say like, "Oh, but you're not really pro-life because you don't really care about having to the child when it's born." Well, if I had a kid who was pregnant and she didn't want to be a mother, then I would say that she didn't have to be, because then I would take all the responsibility for the kid or give it to the kid's dad if she did not want it. And basically, so I am technically pro-life unless she's unmarried in the first trimester. But my more pro-life and most conservative, I would say, because I would, if it was my family member who had an abortion, I would take care of the kid instead of just wanting it to live and let no one kid and not care what happens to it afterwards. Like, because if you are technically opposed to abortions, then it leads to more welfare statism, and that's also the reason why I'm in favor. I am okay with allowing abortion the first trimester, but I prefer a total ban on abortion rather than, like, if you were to compare abortions being completely legal or abortion being completely legal all the way, I would obviously say completely legal. But so basically, what I allow is the maximum amount I would allow for abortion to be performed. I would not allow more than what I've said I would allow. And if it comes to more than what I want or less, then I would always take less. I hope this is my opinion. That's basically my best solution about it, because I believe that people say, "Oh, what if she gets raped?" Well, if she's unmarried, then she doesn't have to prove it, because she should be allowed to have an abortion anyway because she's unmarried and she's first trimester. But if she's married, she has to prove it. Why? Because men still have the right of their kids being born if they have their wife pregnant, because that's the reason why they married her. But if she was raped by her husband and she proved she was raped in the first trimester, she should be having an abortion. But people say it takes a while to prove. Yeah, but men still, and lesbian women who are infertile, still deserve the right to towards reproductive if they have married someone and made someone pregnant.
By the way, I do want to say, if you could wrap this up very quickly.
Yeah, sorry, and I just wanted to. Yeah, I can do it. It's that. So basically, their rights to, towards their marital rights, that supersedes, because they're better to presume their marital rights as being important than to assume that they are automatically rapists, which would be allowing abortions with spousal consent. No, without spousal consent, within just anywhere. So yeah, that's basically my crux on it.
All right, and so JWille, yeah, I think that's pretty much the end of the interview, everybody. And by the way, I want to say that I do not condone everything that was said in chat, particularly all the anti-French rhetoric, trolling that was going on. But JWille, you have anything to say?
Well,
before we leave?
fun fact is that the anti-French, if Bretons tend to be very anti-French because we are technically not ethnically French. So it's kind of hilarious that there would be so much anti-French. But
well, I was kind of referring to all the nuke France comments that were going down in the live chat.
Yeah, there's also something a lot of Bretons would say because they don't like France, because France is imperializing Brittany. This is evil because the France, they said that the Brittany was being too powerful, so they cut off parts of Brittany and separated into different provinces, against the will of the Bretons, by the way. So it's something else. And just to wrap it up, one thing I need to disclose is that when it comes to identitarianism, it means that promoting cultural identity, and we should not replace our own cultural way of thinking with something I think it's like fashion and corporatism or consumerism. Like, I don't like that. And that's the reason why I like conservatarianism more than libertarianism. Because conservatarianism protects it from degeneracy, whereas libertarianism more or less allows degeneracy. And also, if you have, for example, like Bryce Cola, which is a specific brand of cola tasting beverages from Brittany, is preserving the culture rather than adopting a corporate brand. And that's me supporting that is an identitarian policy, which is not identity politics. And also, can I say, sorry, I just have one thing last, the last thing of all of it, but I can stop if you don't want it.
Very quickly, like just if you can like sum it up in a minute or two.
If you look at I can. If you look at Pennsylvania, it's a mall there called Mall of Prussia, which is highlighting the cultural heritage, which is sort of like life in the German belt. And that's also, and me supporting that, I think that's good. It's also a way of identity and cultural heritage. It's preserving over a different like corporate thing. So that's also the same aspect of Bryce Coke. So that's just me explaining how identitarian ideas mightn't be identity politics. And supporting those things doesn't make someone identitarianism, but wanting to support it for identitarian reasons is not identity politics. So that's it. Sorry.
All right, so this has been my newest guest for Strike Force interview, JWille, and I would like to thank you very much, JWille, for coming on the program and talking about South Korean and South African. My bad. I'm getting my words confused up here because a whole lot of talk of North Korea in the chat. But I'd like to thank you very much for coming on and talking about overseas politics, like particularly of South Africa and France and Brittany, as you mentioned. So,
thank you.
So, and other issues and why gun rights is rather important. But anyway,
they are important.
So, for everybody in the chat, thank you for participating a whole lot. And in my next couple of episodes of Strike Force, I will have like a couple of editorials, and hopefully sometime soon I will be interviewing Taylor, the cultural boomerist, and we'll be like debating economics. I'm going to be debating a communist on economics. That's always fun and good.
Oh God, I'm so tuning in for that. It sounds funny.
And probably, hopefully, I'll be soon enough moderating a debate between Cold of Ham and Night Shift 10,000 on gun rights. So stay tuned for all that. But for right now, I'm the Dark Conservatarian. This has been my guest, JWille, and we'll see y'all later. God bless. Signing out. Peace.
Bye-bye.